one of the biggest challenges that I think a lot of people struggle with is when they realize somebody's not a good fit because they're afraid to let them go and they're afraid to have that conversation. They're conflict avoiders. Now they're stuck dealing with this problem and with this cancer that starts to affect the entire organization and slowly starts to kill it from the inside out.
It's really tough, Iggy, when you've got a good person who's a bad employee and you have to make a decision to let them go, knowing sometimes that they are, not necessarily in a good financial situation. I know, G, you're smiling because we've definitely been poor with this over the years, and it's something that we're constantly improving on. How do you go, Iggy, when you do determine that someone isn't a good fit? What's your process for actually taking them to the point of dismissal? How do you actually go about that?
I follow the kind of process that my mentor used to say, like, you got to have the conversations. You got to dive in head first and then look for an exit. Right. So the way that I dive in, if I know I'm going to let somebody go, especially if the hardest people to let go are those that you genuinely like you really like the person. And you may be, if it wasn't for the work, you'd probably be great friends with this person. You'd be somebody that you go out and have a beer with. But you got to be able to separate the emotions from this situation. So for me, I disconnect myself from him. Like, you know what? He's a great person. I really like the person. We could be, if it wasn't for this, we'd be best friends and we can enjoy a ton of beer. I check that off and I'm like, put it aside. Now let's look at the actual situation objectively. This is how he's performing. This is how it's affecting the team. And this may be a situation where it's not in his best interest to even keep him here because he's not at that level, and continuing to keep him in this situation isn't going to give him the kind of development that he needs, right? It's like trying to fit a square peg into a circle. It's not going to work. And maybe it's because he's not performing at the level because it's just not a good fit for him. So I try to approach it from that standpoint. When I look at it in that way, I'm like, you know what? The fact that he's still here is actually hurting him and hurting us in the business even more than it would hurt me to let him go.
I think firing someone it's really always a logical decision, but we have a really bad habit of making it an emotional one. And if we were able to effectively step back and make it a logical decision, there really wouldn't be any difficulties. And, obviously it's always easier firing an asshole than it is to fire a nice person, especially if they're like got family relying on them and all that sort of stuff. So, ultimately it's about stepping back and realizing that employment is essentially an agreement where both parties have to do their part. And if they stop doing theirs, then really that your part, which is to give them a stable job and income, that really should disappear as well.
That person's probably costing you a lot of money. And you've got to also, you've got to make it more logical, think about the bank. It's like, is your relationship or friendship with a person in your business worth 200 grand to you? And when you actually start thinking about it like that, all of a sudden you're like, maybe it's not. Maybe I prefer an extra 100 grand in my bank account.
Well, it's not just the financial cost of having that employee. It's actually the opportunity cost of what they're wasting. I mean, one of our notorious hires, I guess, was incredibly expensive in sales because it wasn't just the fact that they were costing us wages. It was the amount of calls that they were burning and then complete and utter disregard of any sort of authority that we possessed, as employers. So this is the thing. You need to think about the cost of the employee, the cost of how much money you're losing if you had someone in that role actually performing at the level that you're satisfied with as well.
Well, when you make that mathematical, it's like, it costs us, let's just say it costs us $150 to get someone on a call. Now, what we're doing is effectively she was converting at 40%, right? Now, when you think about that, you could actually get someone who's going to convert at like 60%, 75%. And all of a sudden, if they're converting at the 75% range, you're actually making double the amount of money off that same employee with the exact same wage. And I think like one way that we always look at this is, actually get out the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet, and have a look and figure out projections as to what would happen if this person's performance improved, particularly with performance-based jobs like sales.
So I would say what we've done so much better in recent years, and ever since I've known you, Iggy, you've done this extremely well, but it's basically to outline very clear expectations from the beginning. And if someone misses those expectations, it's about letting them know quickly and in a way that is very, very clear for them to understand. It doesn't have to be coming down on them like a ton of bricks, but essentially from the very beginning, expectations are set with a disciplinary pathway. And if that person fails to meet their end of the bargain, you communicate with them clearly, quickly, and if necessary, that results in, going through those disciplinary levels that result in dismissal. And I think that was probably all of the problems that we had in the past, came down to us not setting clear expectations, getting unhappy, having like airy-fairy meetings. And then, we'd agree on something that wasn't done. And because we didn't set that disciplinary pathway, it became very, very messy. Now, the way that we do things these days is if somebody comes in and they underperform, immediately they get told again. Then we start talking about warnings or dismissal. And the system is much, much more powerful.